Okay, so let's talk about glass. Let's talk about the lenses that you use in photography, and maybe if you've got questions about what type of lens you should get. Hopefully this will answer some of the questions. It may also generate some questions you'd never thought of. So let's just talk in general about lenses, what they do, how they work, just in general terms, so you can start making some decisions on what type of equipment you want to get. So I'm not a super technical photographer. I understand how this stuff works. I don't really get into the real mechanics of how it works necessarily, like what happens in camera when you take a picture at 14 millimeters versus 300. All I know is the difference is wide, tight. So 14 millimeters is my widest lens. I generally would explain that it's basically what your peripheral vision can see, a 14 millimeter camera can capture. Now, off to my right over here is a table. I can see it in my peripheral vision as a blob of something, but I can't distinguish that it's a table. There's a light here in front of me that in my peripheral vision, I can make out that it's a light. I'd best describe 14 millimeters is as wide as the point where your peripheral vision can still sort of make things out to see what they are. So I would use my hands to illustrate that this is probably what 14 millimeters looks like. So if I put a 14 millimeter lens on this camera and take a picture right now, I'm shooting the image this wide. To understand lenses, there's two different types basically. There's zoom and then there's prime. This is a 14 millimeter to 24 millimeter zoom lens. So anytime you hear that a lens is focal length of, and it lists two different focal lengths, if it says 24 to 70 millimeters, that means it's a zoom lens and the focal range is 24 millimeters to 70 millimeters. If you see a lens that just says 35 millimeters, that means it's a prime lens and it doesn't zoom. It's just literally 35 millimeters. It doesn't matter what you do with it, it's always going to be the same focal length. Why should you choose zoom versus prime? It's one of the biggest challenges I faced as a rookie, and I'm finding that as I get older and more experienced into this, every time you buy a lens you have to ask the question, do I want a prime, do I want a zoom? Okay, so the difference in general terms, a prime lens again is single focal length. I've got a 35 millimeter prime lens, I've got a 100 millimeter prime lens, I've got a lot more inside, but I just brought these four to kind of illustrate. This is a 14 to 24 zoom, and this is a 120 to 300 zoom, okay? And so prime, you're generally going to get a lower aperture with a prime lens. Now, I don't understand, again, all of the mechanical stuff that goes on inside the lens. A lot more equipment that has to go inside this lens for the aperture range to go down as far as 1.4, which this lens will do. If you get a zoom lens, because that zoom equipment takes up more space and requires more technology and becomes more expensive, zoom lenses are more difficult to get the same lower aperture range because I guess they'd just be super expensive or so much technology that it'd be too robust. So what I generally do is I ask the question, at what focal length will I know that I really want to use this lens a lot and I'm not going to mind that I can't zoom it? For me, 35 is one of the answers to that question. For me, 50 is probably my number one answer to that question, and I don't have that to show you because it's on my camera filming this video. But a 50 millimeter, you can see the camera is literally 12 feet from me, so the width of this shot will kind of give you an idea of what 50 millimeters looks like. And so if I were to put on the 35 millimeter lens for this shot, you'd see that the width would go much farther out. If I switch to the 120 to 300, with this long lens on that camera 12 feet from me at 120, it probably would get my entire face filling up the frame. You don't want to see that. And then at 300, I'm probably too close to the camera for it to focus in. Decide what you want to capture. Are you doing landscape? Are you doing athletics? Do you want to get the broad spectrum of everything around you, or do you want to get the full moon just and fill in the frame? Okay, so I'm talking today in terms of focal lengths between 14 millimeters and 600 millimeters because that's the range that I operate in. I don't have anything lower than 14, nothing longer than 600, and the only times I would need those are for special type circumstances where I can rent one if I need one. But for me, I never have any hobbies, and I don't have any paid work that would ever require me to go below 14 and above 600. So I operate with about 10 different lenses. That I could probably get rid of 6 of them and still do all my paid work, still do everything same quality. There are just some shots where you just really need a different lens. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about all of the focal ranges in between. Okay, so my first question would be, what type of shots do you want? And that could be, I don't know, or it could be, well, there's 4 or 5 different scenarios that I'd like to shoot. So that's where you get into the challenge of what lens to choose or what lenses to choose. You can get lenses that start from 24 to 105 that are really good quality. You also can get lenses that go from 24 to, I think, 600. That broad a focal range is going to reduce the quality, or the price is going to be astronomical. So let's talk about the different types of lenses that are really the reasonable choices, and even some of these are kind of expensive, but they are within the realm of possibility for most amateurs and most beginning or experienced paid photographers. Real estate, landscape shots, anything where I really want the wide shot, I want to see everything, I always use my 14 to 24, and I always use it at 14. I almost never zoom this one. All right, and moving up from there, my 35 is probably my second most utilized lens for video. For images, I wouldn't say I use it that often because I've got 14 to 24 here, and I've got 50 on the lens that we're doing this video from. And so if I need something at 35, I can use my 50. If I need a little bit wider, I can back up. Don't forget, you can also zoom with your feet sometimes by backing up, or you can zoom in by walking forward. But if I really need something at 35, I'm okay shooting it at 24 on this one. But for video, I like the 35 because if it's low light, the aperture on this is super low. And so you can get really good quality images or videos in a low light environment with a low aperture. And again, this one, aperture goes to 1.4. This is a 120 to 300. Now, you can get long lenses like this without spending a ton of money, but the reason this lens is so expensive and the reason it's an awesome lens is it's a 120 to 300, but an aperture of 2.8 throughout the entire range of that focal length. So I can capture an image at 2.8 aperture at 120, and I can zoom all the way in at 300 and still use 2.8 aperture. I'm sure you could get this lens in an aperture of 4, and it probably would cut the price. It'd probably be 30% what I paid for this one. I don't mind saying none of this is to flex, but it's all about being educational. I think this is close to a $4,000 lens when I got it new. This 14 to 24 2.8 aperture lens from Sigma. I think this was $1,500. Both of these are Sigma. I use Canon cameras, so I generally use Canon lenses or Sigma lenses. And this is just a quick commercial for Sigma. I've never seen any image quality difference between Sigma and Canon, and Sigma is usually a little bit less expensive. I think with the Canon name, you pay a little bit more for the Canon name. That's not a bash against Canon. I've got 6 or 8 Canon lenses and love every single one of them. But this is a quick commercial that Sigma will usually get the job done just as well as Canon, and I think that probably also holds true for Sony and Nikon. But again, I'm a Canon guy, so that's all I know. I have 3 kids. To pick a favorite would be impossible. Love all of them the same. With my lenses, I probably say this is my favorite lens every time I pick one up because I love all of them for certain specific reasons. This one is absolutely one of my favorites. It's just that I don't use it that much. When I do use it, like when I really need it, it's amazing. It's 100 millimeters by Canon. It's 100 millimeter, 2.8 aperture macro lens. Now, I've always wondered why they call it macro. It seems like the term should be micro to me, but what it does is it has the ability to focus on images really, really close. Most of these other lenses, your subject's going to need to be 3 or 4 feet sometimes in front of the camera, and with some of these longer lenses, it could be 10 or 12. With this one, I don't know the specs of exactly how close, but if I had it mounted to my camera right now, and I'll take the hood off so you can see the length of it. If I had it right here, I could literally focus on my thumbnail and could see every little detail of my thumbnail with this lens. The macro term means that it has the ability to focus on images up really close and personal. I use this a lot for food photography. So figure out what you want to do. Figure out what kind of shots you want to get. Do you want wide? Do you want zoomed? Do you want really tight shots? Do you want to get the whole atmosphere? Do you want somewhere in between? Are you going to be in low light? Are you going to be in daylight? A lot of those things factor into what types of lens that you should choose. It's really impossible for me to tell you the best lens to start with because it really depends on the types of shots that you get. Always get the lens that you can afford, but I always advise if you can squeeze out some more dollars to get the one that's a step up, I always recommend it. I don't think you'll ever regret it. The only time you're ever going to regret buying any of this equipment is if it becomes a dust collector up in your attic or on your bookshelf. So the key is figuring out how serious are you, how committed are you, and if you're doing this professionally, I would say buy the absolute best, even if it means you got to put a little bit on your credit card, because you're going to get better images. When you get better images, you get more work. When you get more work, you make more money. When you make more money, you can pay for more lenses. So I'm a big fan of getting more lens than I actually think I need, because I'm either going to grow into it or I'm going to find some opportunities where the lower quality lens would not have done the trick. So the lens part of photography is a lot of fun. It's also where the money is. It gets expensive, but it also can be fascinating with the types of images you can get with the different types of lenses. So put some thought into it. If you got questions, feel free to reach out to me. Send me a message and let me know what you're kind of struggling through with regard to your decision, what type of work you want to do, what kind of shots you want to get, what kind of budget you've got, and I'll do the best I can to help. But it's always going to be hard for me to choose a lens for somebody because I don't really know everything that you're going to be doing with it. I'll gauge, on a level of 0 to 100 how serious you are, how committed are you to using this lens, and I think that usually dictates how much budget I would recommend that you go up and over your typical budget to get the better lens. But overall, lenses is ultimately what makes photography so much fun, and it's the part that I'm so fascinated with. And as you can tell by a third of my inventory being here on the shot, you can tell they got 2/3 in the house. You can tell I got maybe a little lens problem, but if you ask my wife, she'd agree. But it is what makes photography fun, and especially as a professional photographer, I've got to have all these lenses for a lot of the different options. And so it's a lot of fun, it's a lot of work, but figure out what you need. Let me know if I can help, and happy photography.